I didn't even light my candle. So, I want to talk about kick drums today. And kick drums, if you've spent any time in electronic music production tutorial YouTube, you're often told is the most important element of your track. And I wouldn't necessarily say it's the most important, but it is certainly a very important element of your track. And a kick drum sound can often define the genre or the style of your track, or even establish what section of the song you're in. Because at the beginning you might have a more airy kick drum, and then when the drop hits you have something that really thumps and rumbles. So I want to talk about the different elements that go into a kick drum, how you can decide on those elements, and how to piece them together into something that's cohesive. Before I move on, I want to remind everyone that I have a Patreon where I release sample packs once a month, patreon.com/June_Bernie. Link somewhere probably. The next sample pack I will release will be a pack of kick drums, some of which you'll see me make here today. But also, I have an EP out. Go listen to it on Spotify or SoundCloud. I haven't decided if I'm putting it on Bandcamp yet. I don't actually have a Bandcamp. Maybe I should get a Bandcamp. So let's not waste any time. Let's get right into it. I'm going to start with a MIDI track, and in that MIDI track, I am going to add a drum rack. Now, there are three kind of main elements to a typical kick drum that I like to make. The first is the click, and that's the sound of the, if you're thinking about a physical drum head, that's the sound of the beater hitting the drum membrane. Then you also have the body. The body is the sound of the resonating membrane. And then I also like to add what I call a filler sample. You can think of it as like a noise sample, or gives it a little bit of air. Something to kind of give it a bit more texture, because a click and a body by itself can sometimes sound a little bit thin. So we'll get into more detail of what each of these sounds accomplish as we move forward. Let's start by finding a nice click sample. So I'll search the word click and see what comes up. Okay, I quite like this. So let's drag that into the drum rack. Now I want to find a nice body for the sound, and I actually know where I'm going to go for this. There's a pack called Designer Drums. Here it is, and if you go into drums, drum hits, you have all these different kinds of sounds, and you'll notice that these aren't actually samples. These are instrument racks. They're usually operator-based instrument racks, and you use these to synthesize different drum elements. So I want something that has a lot of body, that has a lot of resonance, something that's almost like an 808 that has like a tone to it. So I'm going to try. I quite like this. I kind of like how dirty it is. So I'm going to put that in my drum rack. We're going to mess with it a little bit more. But the last thing I want to get is an acoustic kick. This is going to act as our filler or noise sample. Okay, this one sounds good. It actually sounds nice and clean. So we got our click, we got our body, and we have our filler sample. I'm going to make a MIDI clip. I'm going to make it 2 beats long. And I'm just going to place a MIDI note on every sound so we hear them all at once. And by itself, this is going to sound like trash. I was right. So we're going to start adjusting some levels, messing with these samples a little bit. So I like to start with the click. It's literally the first thing you hear. So I think it's quite important. So I'm going to make this quite short, give it a fade. So it's just a little something. I'm also going to transpose it down, but then also, counterintuitively, cut out some of that low end. So it's just this little... That's great. Now we're going to add the body, this sound. Now there's a lot going on with this body. I want to simplify it a bit. I notice in this rack that there's a grain delay, and there's also a phaser. That's a lot going on. So I'm going to try deactivating some of these effects. I hear some sort of ring modulation going on. I hear something kind of ringy that I want to get rid of. So I'm kind of, I'm not thinking too hard about it. I'm just kind of turning knobs. I'll take a low pass filter maybe. Okay, that's sounding a lot better. Now, one thing you might notice about this sound is that it doesn't really have a fundamental pitch like a lot of kick drums do, where you have this kind of doo, 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 like an 808 does. It's kind of more of this low rumble, and that's okay. Not every single genre needs to have a nice pronounced fundamental. I actually think that the dirtiness of this kick will lead me down an interesting path, because I've been making a lot of these kind of dirty kicks recently. Let's also get the acoustic sample in here, so I'll just unsolo these. That's kind of sounding quite good already. I'm going to bring up the attack, because I don't really want the click of the acoustic drum in there. Maybe I'll take the pitch up too. Ooh, I like that. Yeah. I'm going to take the volume down pretty considerably. I want it to just barely be there. I'm going to make the click a bit louder too. Well, instead of making the click louder, I'm going to turn everything else down. Open up this filter a little bit. Another thing you might notice is that I'm making this kick quite long. And there's a good reason for that. I tend to, whenever I'm designing kick drums, err on the side of them being too long. And the reason being is if I pick a kick drum sample out of a sample pack, it's very easy for me to make it shorter. It's a lot harder for me to reliably and without artifacts or distortion make it longer. So I err on the side of it being too long, because you can always just add fades later. I'm going to see if I can make this body a little bit lower. Okay, cool. We have this long, kind of rumbly, noisy kick, and I'm loving it so far. Let's start doing some effects processing. So I'm actually going to just drag the saturator I have in my my default simple mixing rack here, which I believe you can actually get in one of the packs I released on Patreon. Patreon.com/June_Bernie. So I'm going to make 2 of these. I'm also going to grab a glue compressor. I'm going to put one before the distortion and then another one after the distortion, because we're going to do different things with them. You could also use something like OTT or any kind of plugins that will control the dynamics of your sound. Speaking of dynamics, I'm also going to grab a limiter. Granted, this limiter is more housekeeping than anything else. It's just there to make sure I don't clip. So let's start messing with these settings. Take the threshold down a little bit. I want to kind of slow attack, because I want that transient to pop through. I want to take the ratio up, because I want it to be pretty aggressively compressed. I'm going to take the release time down too. Make it nice and tight. This is interesting. The compression alone is giving it some more knock, some more like kind of sound, as opposed to that like low rumble that we had before, which I quite like. Now let's saturate it a bit. I'm going to use just the analog clip. I want to go for some pretty light saturation here, maybe 3 dB of drive, and then take the dry wet down. Again, the length of the sample is quite long, so that's going to affect how the distortion and the compressors react to it. With my second saturator here, I'm going to use the medium curve. Again, not too much drive, maybe a little bit more this time, and then take the dry wet down even more. I'm hearing some of that ringiness again in the body, so I'm going to filter some of that out. Now, with the second glue compressor, I'm going to do some soft clipping. So all that requires that I do is click this button here, activate soft clipping, and then take the makeup gain up. And you'll notice if I take it up, this little light will flash. Now, I'm actually realizing in real time that this clipping doesn't sound that great. Okay, I just want the lightest amount of soft clipping I can get. Okay, that's not bad at all. I'm going to make the kick a little bit less long. We're getting some good material there. Now I might actually want to clip it a little bit more. I'll mess with some EQ. This is something I always do, but it seems appropriate here. So we're getting a lot of kind of low-end rumble here. I don't necessarily want all of that. That's much cleaner. And maybe I want to give it a little bit more presence around like 500 hertz. Okay, so we're almost clipping here. So I'm going to take the gain down a bit. Not bad. I think I want some more aggressive compression though. So, as I mentioned before, I'm going to use some OTT. And as I'm sure a lot of you know, OTT, don't overdo it. You know, a little bit goes a long way. Nice, we're getting a lot of that mid-range knock now. I like that. Once I've done quite a bit of processing, I like to do a little bit of adjusting the mix of the sounds going into those effects, because you'd be surprised how much difference small changes can make when you have effects processing happening. So here I'm messing with the pitch envelope of the body. So try, I don't know what this ringer does, but let's find out. Absolutely not. Glad I checked. And I don't want any spread here either, just because this isn't supposed to be a wide sound. It's a kick. It should be, you know, rattling the mono sub. Okay, this is turning out quite good. Give it a little bit of gain on the limiter. You know, I don't want more than like 2 decibels of gain reduction here. It's mostly there just to make sure that I'm at about 0 dB. Freeze track. Flatten. So now I like to do something that I don't often see people do, and it's use a utility device to modulate or to control dynamics. And I'll show you what I mean. Grab a utility device. I'm just going to automate this gain here. And when I'm looking at the kick drum, the first thing I notice, obviously, is that there's a lot of stuff happening at the very, very beginning of the sound. I don't necessarily want that. So I'm going to create a little automation node here, and I'm just going to bring it down like 3 dB. Just gives a little bit of less of that presence in the front of the sound. Makes it a bit warmer, I guess? Warmer isn't the right word. More friendly? That's the technical term, friendly. And I'm also going to bring up some of this tail. So I'm going to make another automation node about here, and I'm just going to very slowly slope upward. Now, a short little tangent about this technique. What I'm doing here effectively is compression. I could feasibly do everything I'm doing right now with just a compressor. But I find that thinking about things as automating volume can make everything a lot more clear, and also gives you a whole lot more control. Because even if you are a ninja with the compressor and you know all about like perfect attack times and release times and all that stuff, automation on a very small scale can go a really, really long way. And for the sake of controlling my dynamics a bit, a good old limiter. Perfect. Okay. So again, freeze track, flatten, and we're not quite done. I sometimes like to transpose the sound up and down a bit to see if I can get anything interesting there. So I'm noticing obviously that it's cutting off right here and you're hearing that click, so I'm going to add a fade. I'm actually going to make this quite a bit shorter. Again, erring on the side of too long. Okay, so this is almost, a quarter note long at 90 beats per minute. And again, quite a long kick drum, but we can always make it shorter. It's a lot harder to make it longer. For the sake of making this just a little bit more interesting, I'm going to add an amp device. I find that the bass preset on the amp is really nice for kick drums sometimes, for maybe obvious reasons. A touch of EQ, make it a bit shorter. Okay, so this kick actually turned out quite interesting. It's got this very dirty, earthy kind of quality to it. This is something that maybe I would use in a really aggressive track, something that isn't very melodic and delicate, but something that really makes you... So this kick turned out kind of cool in an unexpected way. I might use this in like an intro or a bridge, because it doesn't really knock the same way that like a Skrillex kick or something does. But it has this kind of earthy rumble to it, which I think is quite nice. So again, freezing track, flattening track, and then you can save it to wherever you want in your hard drive. So I hope you found this helpful. This outlines some of the techniques I use when I'm designing kick drums. A lot of these same techniques get applied when I'm designing snare drums too, so that's something I may make a video about in the future. I appreciate you watching this video. Like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Listen to my new EP, Bad Praxis. Consider supporting me on Patreon, patreon.com/June_Bernie. You can find lots of samples like this and more for just $1 a month. And with that, hope to see you soon.
Yeah, catch me at my darkest, feeling a spark to start shit. It's bloodstained fingers on a pen, feeling marvelous. The people already shown what is sown when you dig deep. 6 feet.